All right, U.S. history students, today we're going to be talking about several things. We're going to be talking about a guy named Alexis de Tocqueville, who you see on the screen right here. And then we're also going to be talking about some things that happened that are important that are going to transition us from founding documents into the Gilded Age, which is going to be our next section that we study. So let's start with Alexis de Tocqueville. He was a Frenchman, and he was sent by the French government to come to the United States in the early 1800s for the purpose of studying the U.S. prison systems. The French were looking to reform their prison system. They wanted to take a look at what the United States had, and so he came over for that. While he was over here, he took a hard look at the United States, what was going on, and specifically our democracy and our government system. And so he made several observations. He wrote a book called Democracy in America. Right here, Democracy in America. And in that book, he wrote about 5 things that he saw that were crucial to America's success. So 5 things in America's democracy that were important and were crucial. So let's talk about each one. First one is egalitarianism. So that's all people are equal. Populism, which means the people rule. We, the people, are the ones that determine what the government's going to be like and how it's run. Liberty and freedoms. Individualism. People are free to be individualistic, to look out for themselves. And then laissez-faire is the last one. That's going to be the government is taking a hands-off approach as far as the economy goes. All right, let's take a deeper look at the 5 values that Tocqueville wrote about in his book. Now, egalitarianism, it is going to be that everyone is equal. Now, he's contrasting this because he's used to France, where it's in Europe, and in many societies in Europe, society was built around social classes that you were born into. In America, you're not born into a specific class that you can't move up or down from. So in America, he said, yeah, there are differences between the amount of money people have, the amount of power people have, the amount of intelligence people have, but in society, everyone is considered equal, even though there's different amounts of power and wealth, etc. In Europe, it was completely different. And so this is one thing he wrote that was crucial to America's success. The next one is populism. Now, populism is participation of the common people. Everyone gets involved, not just kings and queens and nobility. It's everyone's involved in politics. Everyone gets a vote. Everyone goes to town hall meetings, and everyone is going to be working for the peace and prosperity of all. And then third, he says liberty. So you have protection against a tyrannical government. So the government can't come in and tell you what to do all the time. There are limitations on the government. That's one of our principles. Our constitutional principles is limited government. Fourth, individualism. So the government doesn't dictate what individuals do, like many societies in Europe at the time. So in America, people are free to do what they wish. They can rise in society. They're not stuck in a certain place in society where they can't rise up. They can do what they want to do. They can work at the job they want to work. They can make the amount of money they want to make. So each individual is looking out for themselves. And that feeds into laissez-faire as well. Laissez-faire is the government does not get involved in the economy as much. It's hands-off approach. The government is stepping back. The people have to rely on themselves. The people are going to be the ones that are judging their own interests, what kind of job they have to do, what kind of money they have to make, what kind of business they're going to create, and they go and they rely on themselves. All right, so these 5 things are super critical to America's success, according to de Tocqueville in his book, Democracy in America. Now that we've talked about de Tocqueville, we're going to move on to the late 1800s, and we're about to move into a period known as the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is a time of lots of prosperity. On the outside looking in, it looks like there's lots of wealth. There still is some problems bubbling underneath that we're going to get into. But before we can get from the early 1800s to the late 1800s, in the Gilded Age, we have to talk about a few more things. The first things we're going to discuss are some mottos of the United States. Now, I have two mottos here that we're going to talk about. These two mottos are E pluribus unum and In God We Trust. Now, let's hit E pluribus unum first. It means literally out of many comes one. So this motto was created because it shows that we have lots of states. Today we have 50 states, and they all come together as one nation. This motto was actually adopted by the Continental Congress back in 1782, but became official in 1956. The 1956 Congress is the one that officially brought it in as the official motto. And then the second one, In God We Trust, was also brought in 1956 as the national motto. And it's been on coins since 1864. So it's been on coins since right at the end of the Civil War. It's been challenged in courts many times, but the courts always rule that it's used ceremonially and not necessarily religiously, and so therefore it's allowed to stay on money, like you can see over on the right. And In God We Trust was created in 1956. We haven't gotten into this era in U.S. history yet, but just to give you a little insight, this is an era known as the Cold War era, and the United States is in a time of competition and rivalry with the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union at this time is an atheist government, an atheist country. And so in the United States, our Congress said that we want to contrast ourselves with the Soviet Union. We want to make ourselves distinct and different. So therefore, we are a God-believing country, they said. And so we are going to make our motto In God We Trust so that we can contrast with our enemy, the Soviet Union. All right, the last thing that we're going to have to get into just a little bit before we get to the Gilded Age is the Civil War period, because there are several important amendments that you need to know that came out of this period. We don't need to get into the battles. We don't need to get into any of the ins and outs of the Civil War other than the outcome, really. So the Civil War period, once you get into the 1800s, you have sectionalism that starts to emerge. You have a rivalry between the North and South. The West even kind of gets in the mix a little bit. You have three distinct sections. And because of the differences in each, you get the Civil War that occurs, because these different sections can't get along based on slavery, based on economics. A lot of different things play into it. But eventually you get the Civil War that occurs. And so the Civil War lasts for 4 years. Eventually the North wins. Due to its greater population and resources, it defeats the South. The South is defeated. The North pulls the South back into the Union. And after the Civil War, Congress passes several amendments that are known as the Reconstruction Amendments. And they are as follows. So you've got the 13th Amendment, which is abolishing slavery. So slavery is no longer allowed in the United States based on the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment gives former slaves their citizenship, and it guarantees that all citizens have equal protection under the laws from state governments. So this keeps state governments from passing laws that conflict with national federal laws. So the federal government is protecting former slaves and all people, really, with the 14th Amendment from state governments. And then 15th Amendment, this gets into voting, and this says that individuals cannot be denied their right to vote based on race. So this lets all males from any race or ethnicity that are citizens vote in the United States. And before we go, I want to give you one more thing so you can remember these three. These three amendments are super important. So what you're going to remember is the phrase, free citizens vote. So the 13th is free. I'm going to write it up here so you can maybe see it. The 14th is citizens. And the 15th is vote. So you can remember these three amendments, the Reconstruction Amendments, because it's free citizens votes. The 13th gives slaves freedom. The 14th makes them citizens. And the 15th gives them the right to vote.